LiSTNR production.
A warning. This episode contains graphic references to suicide. Help is always available. Dial Lifeline on 13 11 14. It's July 7th, 2005, and it's a typically busy morning on London's Underground. It's like any other day, but then, simultaneously, 3 trains and a double-decker bus explode. Smoke fills the carriages, and panic and devastation takes over London. Detective Gary Powell was sitting at his desk when he heard what we now know as the 7/7 terrorist attacks. I'm former police officer Brent Sanders, and for the past 25 years, I've dedicated myself to sharing what I've learnt on the force to the Australian public so they can better protect themselves from falling victim to crime. So with the help of some of the most respected current and former detectives and high-ranking law enforcement agents, we're going to pull back the curtain on what life is like on the force and what they've learned about how crime and criminals really work. These are real stories from real detectives.
There was what was believed, first of all, to be a power surge on the underground system. What it in fact was 4 suicide bombers. The first time we'd ever seen a suicide bomber in London. They'd arrived at King's Cross Thameslink station at, I think it was about 8:20 in the morning. And then they'd gone down onto the underground system and then split up. And they'd gone to 4 separate locations in central London. The first one was in Aldgate in East London, and then we had Russell Square, and then Edgware Road to the west, and then the fourth one that didn't actually instigate his bomb was believed to have been going towards Euston and King's Cross area. As far as I know, what happened was that the fourth one that didn't actually explode his bomb on the underground reached Euston King's Cross stations, and when he got there, there was a major signal failure, and they were all kicked out, basically cleared off out of the station. And he tried to explode his bomb at that time, but the battery in the bomb failed. So by now, the other 3 are well on their way, but they've got further to go. So they hadn't actually initiated their devices at that time. So this 4th member of the gang went down to King's Cross Station, went into a stationery store and bought a new battery. And then he walked back up towards Euston again. And by then, the other 3 had actually blown themselves up in these various places. So the whole of the underground system was shut down. So that's when he actually decided, well, I can't get onto the underground system. I want to die, because they all want to die. That's what's most frightening about this. He decided to walk about a quarter of a mile away from Euston Station to an area of London called Tavistock Square. And he saw a London bus, a double-decker bus. He decided to get onto this bus. He then placed a new battery in his bomb, and the bomb exploded and killed 13 people on the top of that bus. By now, as I say, the other 3 had detonated their devices as well and caused absolute chaos in London. I did actually hear, I was sitting in a CID office actually quite near, about a mile from Tavistock Square, and I actually heard the bomb go off. And I'd heard a few bombs before, a couple of IRA bombs, and I knew that was a bomb. But it was then at this stage that the news was coming in that these bombs had gone off, 2 of them on underground stations, if that makes sense. A lot of the underground system is actually above ground in London, and the Edgware Road and the Aldgate ones were above ground. But the other one, Russell Square, was on a train between Russell Square and King's Cross Station, which was deep underground. And you can imagine the carnage that actually caused. I think in the end it was 55 people. I think 55 people, 56 people died, including the 4 bombers. And it was about nearly 800 people were injured, some seriously, some not. Some very, very strange stories come out of that because of when a bomb goes off, the force from the bomb will go to the least point of resistance. On the bus, it was up. So that's why most of the people that died on the bus were on the upper deck. On the underground trains, we've got accounts of people who were actually in the carriage where the bomb went off, got away with a few scratches, where people 2 or 3 carriages down actually died. Again, it's all about the path of the force from the bomb as it went off. So it's a terrible, terrible incident. It's certainly the largest single terrorist attack we've had in this country since Lockerbie back in Scotland, back in 1988, I think it was, and certainly the largest bomb attack that we've had in London since the Second World War. So it's a bad day.
It's a shocking day, and Gary, the 4 offenders, British citizens with cultural roots to Pakistan, Jamaica, but again, what we're seeing here again is an act that would be classified by yourself and the investigators as domestic terrorism, even though I guess the ideologies that were being brought in to play here would have been, I guess, very much with regards to, I think, treatment or their perceived views on treatment of Muslims overseas in Afghanistan and other places such as this. So it's almost sort of, I guess, like a blending of external ideologies, which shows up as a case of domestic terrorism. I've probably made a bit of a hash of that, but it's an interesting investigation from that point. Did the investigation go overseas at all and find any overseas links at all, or was it all just localised?
It was mainly localised, but I mean, obviously, their ideology is coming from people around the world, like bin Laden and other people like this that they've listened to, and other various preachers within the United Kingdom at the time. But yeah, I think we would have to classify it as domestic terrorism. All 4 were living in this country. All 4 were part of communities in this country. Why they chose to attack people on the underground system, no one really knows. But see, that's the difference between these people who want to die and people like the IRA that didn't want to die. And that's what makes these people, these Islamic terrorists, so much more dangerous than the IRA and other groups like that.
52 civilians killed on that day, more than 7 or close to 800 injured, and a massive operation. Over 1,000 Met Police on site, over 200 ambos, 250 fireys. You talk of that resilience of the Londoners and that spirit. The underground system, I think, was up and running again within 48 hours, but goodness me, those folks that were going into the underground to get on those trains a couple of days later, they would have been fairly shaken, and because that is not something that you get over in a heartbeat.
No, not at all. And I think it was it a week or 2 weeks after we had what we thought was going to be a similar attack by a similar group, and this is where that incident at Stockwell Tube Station happened, the shooting of that Charles de Menezes. So it was a rough time, to be quite honest with you, and people were really scared, and quite rightly too. But they still went back to work. They still went out on social evenings, and it's just that resilience. It's that old, I think it's that old World War II resilience of, let's keep going. But it was a frightening time. It was an unsettling time. And I think it did change a lot of people's attitudes. People were scared. Some people wouldn't travel on the underground system, and probably there's people out there now that still don't travel on the underground system because of that. Certainly, if they were on the underground system that day. So yeah, it was a frightening time. It was a frightening time.
And Gary, we're going back now 20 years since this incident, and I note that there was not only, of course, a change in attitude amongst Londoners and having gone through something like this. I'm interested in, yourself working in anti-terrorism within the Met Police. I think working hand in hand in a case like this with MI5. What, if any, changes were made there? Because here we are, close to 20 years down the track. There's never been anything like this, and I'm sure that there has been a number of situations that have been identified, suppressed and sorted out that we probably never hear about. But did this bring about changes in the way that the anti-terrorism unit dealt with this and MI5 and that type of thing?
Yeah, there would have been changes. I mean, there was much more cooperation between, in those days it was, we had Special Branch, which was SO12 at Scotland Yard, and we had the Anti-Terrorist Branch, which was SO13, which I was a member of for several years. But there was always a problem. I think it go really. If you look at 9/11, there was a breakdown of communications between the CIA for the intelligence and the FBI, who was the more proactive. There wasn't a sharing of information, and there was a possibility that those attacks could have been prevented. And I think it's the same with 7/7, that there wasn't always this cooperation between Special Branch and the Anti-Terrorist Branch. So much so that I think it was in around about 2009, 2010, they amalgamated Special Branch and the Anti-Terrorist Branch to be in the Terrorist Command, with the intention of making sure that there wasn't a breakdown in communications between the two main investigatory bodies, as well as the MI5 as well. On the ground, there was a huge change, because these people, these four terrorists, were engaged in hostile reconnaissance several times before the attacks, because they didn't really know London particularly well, so they used to come down into London and they used to go and visit these places where they were going to initiate their devices. They were going to look at things that would cause them a problem on the day, the routes they would have to take, each individual. So they planned it. And we, as a police force, and I include myself in that as well, we didn't see them. We didn't pick up on them. We didn't spot them, which we should have done. And when you look at some of the CCTV of them in these hostile reconnaissance situations, walking past police officers and police officers not even taking any notice of them, etc., there had to be a fundamental change in how we, in the very, very grassroots of policing, used our resources to make sure this didn't happen again. And I think it was 2006, so a year after these bombings, we had a couple of American police officers come over from Logan International Airport, where most of these the flights took off. I think 3 out of the 4 took off for the World Trade Center attacks. And they formulated a program which was around a behavioural assessment of looking at people in a different way. And really, it's quite honest with you, it's just going back to basic policing. The policing that we did when I was a young police officer, about looking at people all the time and how they fit into the environment. Do they fit into the environment? What are they wearing? What are they carrying? How are they behaving in situations? Are they behaving differently to other people? And this is basic policing to me. But we had when the Terrorism Act came in the early 2000s, I think it was 2000 if I remember right, they introduced a stop and search power called Section 44. And it basically allowed any police officer to stop anybody without any suspicion whatsoever if they were believed to be engaged in an act of terrorism. So suddenly we had a generation of police officers by 2005 that really were using this terrorism law, this search power, to search people for ordinary day things, which was wrong. They didn't have to formulate reasonable grounds of suspicion for somebody maybe dealing in drugs, or somebody who's a pickpocket or something like that. And we got out of the habit of actually looking at people and forming reasonable grounds to suspect that they were involved in something, which to me is basic policing. It's what policing is all about, is looking at people all the time. and assessing what you've got in front of them. So we brought this program in that the Americans brought over, and it was me and another officer actually started to run this out. And in the end, over about the next 5 or 6 years, we trained around about 2,000 or 3,000 police officers. And it was a revelation, really. We used to do some live practicals. We had a lot of rests. We had a lot of intelligence reports over that time. And now it's a standard thing in most police forces in this country. They have what's called behavioural detection officers that will go out in plain clothes to very, very crowded transport hubs, etc., and just watch people. And they're looking for these people that, are walking a bit slower than everybody else, or looking at different things. They've got interests in different things. They're looking at CCTV cameras, all these sort of things that these terrorists would do or did do during their hostile reconnaissance phase, because that is the best time to actually catch these people. Because you can imagine if you got this, your aim is to kill people and to kill yourself. On the day, these terrorists were quite happy. They were laughing and joking with each other. Somebody described them as if they looked like they were going on holiday. But you then look at them in the hostile reconnaissance stage, they're very, very different, because at that period of time, they've got a fear of failure. They know if they get stopped and arrested during a hostile reconnaissance phase, they have failed in their ultimate mission, which is to kill people and to kill themselves. So we worked around that quite a lot with basic policing, with police officers coming into the job, new recruits, trying to get their focus back on actually looking at people now. And we've had some good results from it. And I think, as I say, I've been out the police now, 7 or 8, 10 years now. I know that they've now got behavioural detection officers out there in all sorts of different police forces, at sporting grounds, at transport hubs, purely looking for people that don't fit in, and then finding out what they're all about. It could be a terrorist, it could be a criminal, it could be whatever. So fundamental policing, I think, since 2005 has changed a great deal on the grassroots level, which is the really important level, because without people, the police officers out there looking and stopping people, talking to them, gaining all this intelligence, the intelligence services such as MI5 and SO15 as it is now, will not have all this information to play around with.
Gary, 1999, neo-Nazi David Copeland was responsible for 3 coordinated nail bomb attacks across London. This is a case you had some involvement in, Gary. Can you just walk us through this one?
Yeah, it was quite a surprise, actually, because we just had the Good Friday Agreement with the IRA in 1997, 1998, and there was a report of an explosion in a market in Brixton, which is in South London, which is a predominantly black area. And actually, I was on the call-out team and rushed down there to seal the scene and examine the scene, which took about 3 days or so. And when we got down there, we cleared the scene, etc. And it was basically a bag that had been left under a stall, a market stall, and it exploded and injured many, many people. It was packed with nails, so you can imagine the devastation of people around there. A lot of bad injuries. But after that, I mean, we were thinking, certainly the senior detectives, of which I wasn't one, I was just one of the team, but the senior detectives were thinking, as we all were, who's put this bomb down? There was no claim of responsibility at the time. And we're obviously thinking about the IRA, but it didn't really fit in with the IRA, because they normally give coded warnings. They don't really want to injure civilians, and their main targets in the UK were infrastructure like the railways and government buildings, etc., like that. So we sort of ruled them out, and then we started to think of it's just the start of the Islamic threat back in 1999, when we're seeing bombs going off in places around the world. And that didn't really fit in either. And then we had the second bomb a week later, and this was in Brick Lane in East London, which is a predominantly immigrant area. It's where the French Huguenots first settled down, and then the Jewish people, and then finally now the Asians. So, first of all, we've got the black community, then the Asian community. So we're starting to think about far right activists, and that's really what it took off, really. So we started to look at that, and then we got a bit of luck. A very, very good piece of detective work on CCTV by one of my colleagues who, as you can imagine, we were studying hours and hours and hours of CCTV in the Brixton area from all sorts of places like shops, etc. And this one detective picked up on somebody walking past. All he could see was these legs, but he had a bag. And about 15, 20 minutes later, those same set of legs went past that camera again, this time without the bag. So we then concentrated on that particular person and then managed to get an image of him and put that out to the newspapers. Unfortunately, he saw it, David Copeland, and he brought his next attack, which was against the gay community. He brought it a day forward. He brought it to a Friday. The other two attacks have happened on Saturdays. And he went into a bar, a very small bar in Old Compton Street in the West End of London, which is notoriously a gay area of London. And he placed this bag in a pub called the Admiral Duncan Public House. And it was a Friday evening. It was pre-theatre traffic. It was packed with people. And he just left the bag there and walked out. And about 5 minutes later, it exploded. And unfortunately, out of the 3 explosions, this one did kill 3 people. 2 of the people that died were actually a husband and wife, so not his target. And they were in there because the third person in their group was a gay man, and he'd taken them in there because he was their best man when they got married. He'd taken them into the pub for a drink before going to the theatre, and all 3 of those people died. And unfortunately, it was found out after that the young lady was actually pregnant. So I think she was 3 or 4 months pregnant. So that's 3 murder victims plus the unborn baby. By now, we'd identified David Copeland, and police were on their way down to an area of southwest England called Hampshire, a county of Hampshire. And he was eventually arrested down there, but it was obviously a day too late. So it's quite a tragic case. I think it was something like he got 6 life sentences in the end. He killed 3 people, and he injured around about 140 or so, many of them children, especially in the Brixton bomb. Not so many of the Brick Lane one, because he actually chose the wrong day, because Saturdays was a very, very quiet area in Brick Lane. If he'd done on a Friday or a Sunday, he would have had much more injuries. But the devastating one was the Admiral Duncan Public House. It was a terrible bomb scene. 3 people died, as I say, with many, many people losing arms and legs and some very, very serious injuries.
Gary, this offender, David Copeland, he's only a young bloke. He's 22. Obviously, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, had some fairly strong links to far-right neo-Nazi groups. But at 22, he probably wouldn't have had too much in the way of previous. What is it that brought him onto your radar? Was it purely through that CCTV footage, or did his name pop up in some other form?
Yeah, he wasn't really on our radar at all, to be quite honest with you. We believe he was a member of Combat 18. It was a far-right neo-Nazi group at the time. But just as a member of it, so I would imagine probably Special Branch, as it was those days, and the intelligence services may have had him on the radar purely for that reason, but certainly not as a potential terrorist as he is. And he was unknown, really. I don't think he had, as far as I know, any previous convictions. Certainly nothing as serious as bomb making, etc. And he basically self-taught himself how to build this bomb for the internet. And it was quite a bizarre bomb because it was a full-size alarm clock linked up to a detonator and packed and surrounded with probably 1,000 or so 6-inch nails in quite a big box. So it was quite heavy. And what he actually did was he actually built these bombs at his home in Hampshire, and he would then prime the bomb on a timer for, say, 2 or 3 hours, or maybe a little bit longer, and then he'd get onto a train in Hampshire and travel up to Waterloo Station in London. So this thing could have gone off at any stage. and then he would then get the underground, or he'd walk or whatever to locations where he was going to put the bomb down and then just leave it. So it's really, I mean, it could have gone off on a tube train or something like that, which would have been total devastation.
He sounds to me like an individual who would have just continued along this path had he not been apprehended.
Yeah, it was a very worrying time because, I mean, I think the security services over here have been quoted several times that the most worrying aspects of terrorism is the lone wolf. Somebody that decides on their own to attack, to place a bomb or stab someone or whatever it is nowadays, and not tell anybody, just doing it off his own back. And it's almost impossible to detect that until it actually happens. I mean, with the IRA, we had informants and all sorts of different intelligence going around. We knew most of who these people were, and they were under surveillance and being watched. And we were very successful, especially in the later years, of disrupting their attacks, mainly through intelligence. And I think that's what brought the Good Friday Agreement about, because they were really on the back foot, the IRA. But with somebody like David Copeland, who just decided through his beliefs to act and teach himself how to build these bombs, it was almost impossible to detect it before the offences happened. And it really came down to a bit of old-fashioned police work, really, looking at CCTV. And we struck lucky. I wouldn't say lucky. It was a very, very good piece of detection by the officer who actually saw him on the CCTV. And we just built up a case up from around there, really. But once you start looking into him, when we went into his house, he had Nazi stickers all over the wall, etc. He admitted his guilt straight away, that he was the attacker. And there was enough to actually enough equipment at the address to actually construct another bomb, a fourth bomb. And we believe that it may well have been the Sikh community up in northwest London, may have been the next target if he hadn't been caught at that stage.
Following his arrest, Gary, as you mentioned, he nodded the head to this. What was his demeanour following his arrest?
He was quite compliant during the interview. He was interviewed over many, many days, and admitted most of the offences, if I can remember correctly now. And he was given 6 life sentences at the Old Bailey in 2000. And I think he's actually he did have some mental health problems. I think he ended up in a mental institution called Broadmoor, where most of our mentally ill terrorists, criminals end up. And as far as I know, he's still there.
Gary, this is 25 years ago, and as you say, it came on the back of a lot of work that had been done where the IRA were quite a focus with regards to their activities in the UK. If we fast forward now, I guess we could argue we're a long way away from all this, Gary, but there does seem to be, not so much in the UK per se, but certainly throughout Europe, somewhat of a resurgence of right-wing sort of anti-immigration, politics and sentiment creeping back in. I think there was even, you'll know more about this, Gary, than I would. There was an incident quite recently in the UK that was sort of like spurred a lot of very anti-migrant sentiment. It was, I think, the murder of a couple of young schoolgirls where the alleged offender was mistakenly named as an immigrant or something, and was that through Manchester or somewhere like that? And I guess what it highlighted is, sadly, this sentiment, this ideology is sort of just bubbling along below the surface, and as in that most recent case in the UK, it doesn't seem to take a lot for it to suddenly just rise up again. As it must be an ongoing concern for those that are working in this environment now.
Yes, I mean the attack was the murder of three young girls who were at summer holiday activity in a place called Southport, which is quite near to Liverpool. And as you quite rightly said, information was put out wrongly on the social media that it was actually an immigrant who'd come across the channel a few weeks before he committed these murders, which was total misinformation. He was actually a young lad, but he was actually born in this country, so he was British. This really encourages, I mean, in this country, we see this a lot. Any excuse for the far right to get involved in whipping up hate using whatever platform it may be, they will use that, and they certainly did in this case. Yes, there was a lot of angry people. Were angry with the immigration policies in this country at the moment. But obviously, an organisation like the far right will take advantage of that and put people into these demonstrations and whip up the violence, etc., against the police to make their point. So yes, it is a worry. It did seem to dampen down for a little while, but and certainly not. I don't think it's as bad as it is in places like France and Germany. But we certainly have a problem here with that, and any opportunity that these far right groups can gain through these situations, like the very, very sad deaths of 3 young girls, then they will take advantage of that.
And Gary, another thing I guess that it highlights, and we've all become very much aware of terrorism, and 9/11, of course, is a real focus point. Everyone can remember where they were, what they were doing at that time. We were chatting just last week. I had a gentleman on that had been in the FBI for some 20 years or so. He was involved in the Timothy McVeigh investigation of the Oklahoma City bombings. And he was saying that then, as in now in the US, domestic terrorism is responsible for taking far, far more lives than anything that sort of comes in from overseas. And here we look at the David Copelands of the world. And I'm just interested on your thoughts on that with regards to the landscape in the UK.
There are a lot of people out there that are prepared to do these sort of actions, and credit to the intelligence services and the police in this country is the ability to disrupt these attacks. And the amount of attacks that they disrupted in the last 20 odd years is phenomenal, really. So, I mean, we haven't really had a bad terrorist attack in this country now for a couple of years now, have we? Really? I mean, we had the London Bridge stabbings couple of years ago, and then obviously before that we had the 7/7 attacks in 2005. But it is a worrying trend, yeah. I mean, McVeigh was a very interesting case, wasn't he? I think he was an ex special forces soldier who was upset because he got looked over for I think he was an ordinary soldier and wanted to go into the intelligence special intelligence people, didn't he? And they turned him down, and he took it out in a devastating manner. But I mean, I wouldn't put us on par with America, to be quite honest with you, but we certainly have these problems which we're fighting continuously.
Gary, I just want to thank you so very much for joining us from over there in the UK, and thank you for the 33 years of service to the good people of London and its surrounds, 8 years of which on that anti-terrorism unit. I'm sure those listening in have found it absolutely enlightening and intriguing, and thanks so much for having a chat to us, Gary.
You're most welcome. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for inviting me.
Crime Insiders Detectives is a LiSTNR original podcast. The production team for this episode was Holly Mitchell, Jade Murray and Link Kelly. Executive producer is Dan Mullins. I'm Brent Sanders. Thanks for listening. Just before you go, I want to let you know about an amazing new podcast the team here at LiSTNR has released. It's called Crime in Focus, Killer Charm. It's a fascinating story about a woman named Sharon Graham, or Muffin, who convinced a lover to kill her ex and another to aid in the cover-up by using a wood chipper. It's a tale of manipulation, greed and control that asks how someone can be capable of this awful crime and if anyone saw the signs before things turned fatal. Crime in Focus, Killer Charm is out now only on the LiSTNR app.